I don't think anybody's going to be surprised if I say that I have some kind of extensive comments. So I'm going to go ahead and plunge in. This is a very hard question, and it requires, I'm glad we're having this discussion and this full discussion and debate, as it were. Bottom line is that there are thoughtful and legitimate arguments on both sides. There just are. I've received input from residents on both sides of the issue, and we've heard input from residents on both sides of the issue tonight. And interestingly enough, those contrasting views are coming from both supporters of switching from at-large to districts and from those who wish that we weren't switching from at-large to districts. So you have this full universe of comments and positions that are coming in. My views are informed by what I've heard from people, including those who, and I appreciate their speaking tonight in this public hearing, and based on my experience as well. And I've had a chance to speak with council members in other cities who have gone through this process. So I want to start first from a common baseline. The common baseline is this. Switching from at-large to districts is obviously very significant. We can all, I think, agree to that. I've said before, putting aside from a voting rights standpoint, I'm skeptical about having districts from a governance standpoint. And it's the governance that I want to focus on here. In my view, and I said this at the prior meeting where we initially discussed these things, I think that unless it's addressed properly, having districts increases the risk of factionalization on this council. I really do. And so, for example, you have a council member who thinks only of their respective district and not at the city at large. Take a specific example. Fighting over who gets a bigger share of pavement dollars in their district each year. There's an example. That's something that we as a council are going to have to work on proactively during this next year. And I think that is work that is ahead of us. So there's the baseline. Now let's weigh both sides. And, you know, being a lawyer, I got to weigh both sides. Sorry about that. Not really. On the pro side, there is some legitimate appeal in having one person responsible to city voters at large. And you distill it down to two reasons. One, that person is unencumbered by having to focus on a specific district and could focus on the city at large. At least that's the assertion. I'm going to come back to that one later. That's the assertion. Number two, from a voting standpoint, as many of you have said tonight, and I appreciate, city residents could elect a mayor separately in addition to their vote for a council member from their district, if we went to, for example, do a 4-district plus a separately elected mayor. Those are good points. Now, you have to weigh them against the counterpoints. On the other side, there are several legitimate arguments, in my view, on why it's not a good idea from a governance standpoint to have a separately elected at-large mayor. And I want to talk about 4 of them. Number one, I'm concerned that having an elected at-large mayor with all the other council members elected by districts actually increases the potential for a dysfunctional council, for a council that's infighting. That is a primary concern of mine. That's not healthy from a governance standpoint. That's not healthy for a well-run city like the city of Camarillo. No one in this room, if I asked people to stipulate, I don't think anyone wants to see our city council become like Congress. Perish the thought. Because very little of substance gets done there because of infighting among members. That, in my view, is actually a worse disenfranchisement of voters than not having a separately elected mayor. Why does having an elected mayor increase the opportunity for factionalization? Or dysfunction. Let's make it dysfunction. Well, the mayor, in essence, and everyone's paid respect to Kevin tonight, we're all picking on him, but the mayor is, in essence, an honorary position. They have just one vote, and the same as other council members. I don't want to see a situation created on the council where animosity is embedded on the council because a mayor feels that his or her vote is worth more and that they're more important than the other council members because they've been elected at large. That's the concern. I think that invites power brokering. I think that invites jockeying for position rather than working as a collective body for the good of the city, because we still have to base, our obligation is to do what we think is right for the entire city. And we all up here obviously have been elected at large, and I know have that perspective. Well, where do I get that from? I get that from 35 years of law practice, many times appearing in front of city councils that have different models of governance, including A, either a mayor, or B, not having a separately elected mayor, or B, not having a separately elected mayor. Secondly, it's not just a council issue. I think there has been comments by a couple of council members tonight and by members of the public that what happens when you have a separately elected mayor and their sense that their view should carry greater weight than other council members, what happens when they're not content with setting policy? What happens when they want to start micromanaging? And by that I mean becoming overtly engaged in the management of the city. And in effect, I've seen situations where that person becomes an ex officio city manager. That can create internal conflicts in the management of the city. So it's not just at the council level, it's at the management level. Having a separately elected mayor can create the expectation, however erroneous, that the mayor manages the city. That's not the mayor's job. It's not the mayor's job here. Camarillo's system of government, having a professional city manager run the city under the policy direction of a 5-member city council, has worked since the city's incorporation. It's worked well. Most people I know, I guess there are a few exceptions, but most people I know think the city, by and large, is relatively well run. And sure, we got issues. We have things we could do a lot better on, and we always do, and I freely admit that. But I think having a separately elected mayor, you're asking for potential problems from that standpoint. Thirdly, the mayor is an honorary position. But with a separately elected mayor, you have this expectation created. I'm concerned about that. You have an expectation created that they're more powerful than they actually are. So the question is, why create that expectation when they have more power when in fact they don't? What's the point? Fourthly, an elected mayor position is viewed by some as just a stepping stone to higher office, as opposed to focusing on what's best for the city. I want the mayor here to focus on what's best for this city, and I think all my colleagues do that. Those 4 thoughts are all, in my view, real-world problems created by having a separately elected mayor. And the bottom line is that it has the potential to make the council's government of the city more difficult and more dysfunctional, and no one wants that to happen. Setting the table for council dysfunction is not a win for city residents. It's a loss. That's a worse disenfranchisement of voters. That's creating the friction points that were talked about earlier. Why go do that? Why set yourself up for potential failure? Interesting, we've received arguments from a proponent in one of the emails a real proponent, an ardent proponent of 5 districts, who asserts that having a separately elected mayor would undermine the whole rationale for going to a district system and result in less representation and greater dilution of minority voters. And they also added, and create a new level of bureaucracy where you have a council, a mayor, and then a city manager. I understand that argument, and I think it's a thoughtful argument. One thing that really strikes me here is that in arguing for, in my view, with all due respect, in arguing for having 4 districts plus a mayor, there's an assumption that's being made, or a threshold premise that's being articulated. And that's that as a council member representing a district, I cannot or won't do what's best for the city of Camarillo. Well, that's wrong. That's inconsistent with the oath of office that I took. I mean, sure, if I move forward and represent a district, my obligation is to act on what I think is best for the city as a whole and its residents as a whole. That's how I see my obligation as a council member. Well, that doesn't change just because the district is transitioning. I'm sorry, that doesn't change just because the city is transitioning to a district system. It doesn't change it at all. So, on balance, I think the arguments against having a separately elected mayor outweigh the perceived advantages. The staff report is elucidating because there are many other local cities referenced in the staff report that do not have a separately elected mayor. Some have districts, some don't. But for example, City of Ventura just went through districting, and the council chose not to have a separately elected mayor. So we're not out here on a limb by ourselves at all. Lastly, almost. Finally, almost. Camarillo in the last 6 months, think of the changes that we've undergone here in the city from a governance standpoint. 2 really extraordinary changes. Term limits for council members, which I'm intimately familiar with, having drafted Measure E and battled with my colleagues at that time over. And number 2, switching from at-large to district voting. Well, there is a legitimate point of view that we've got a lot on our plate right now in just dealing with those, and we should take some time to breathe before instituting another significant change. I thought the speakers tonight, I really appreciated. I think they were outstanding in their views, and I want to thank you. One comment I want to make, a couple of comments. One speaker, and I believe it was Dr. Dixon, said it's not whether you work well together. And respectfully, I disagree with that. Very respectfully, I disagree with that. Because I think it's very important how the council works together. I also think it's very important that citizens feel represented. And frankly, you could argue, I think, that it'd be better to either have all at large or all districts, rather than cut it up into some hybrid of a 4+1. This next comment is with respect to the mayor and having a vision as the mayor, and I think that's a very good comment. But I would also add to that this council every February spends several hours in a goal-setting session and sets the roadmap for the next year. And that's done collectively between the 5 of us, as it should be, because all of us are establishing the roadmap that we want the city manager to follow over the course of the next year. And he's taking his direction from us. And I think that's the right way to go. I think we should narrow this down tonight. I think we should, I think it's responsible to narrow it down tonight. It's a responsible thing to do. And I think we should, this might come about in another couple of years. I don't think, who knows? We may want to come back at some point and re-examine it in 2020, 2021, right? But I think right now, we need to breathe and breathe deeply, do what's in front of us, and stay with the district, stay with a five council member district setup. So thanks for your patience with those long remarks.